All right, welcome back to Rebooting the Blue. This week we've got Chris Humphreys here, and we are diving into, is your relationship stressed? Let's level up your communication skills. So, Chris, this is a fun one. Let's take it away. Let's start with why are humans driven to pair bond at all?
Oh man, that's a big question with a lot of an answer. I mean, you can take the biological concept of just the need, right? They're emotional, the emotionally focused stuff, right? As a, again, quote unquote trauma therapist, there's that portion there too about sense of safety. But really, I mean, when you're talking about adults or those that are starting maturing up, I mean, um, there's there's this need for connection, driven a lot of times again by the visual. You just say it, right? I see someone who looks like I want to talk to them, and as a person that works with couples, and I kind of flow in and out of modalities, but the one you'll hear me reference a lot of times with couples is the Gottman technique, right? And they talk about, relationships, and they use that metaphor of sort of building them like a house, and then the bottom floor, the foundation is attraction. And if we start to break that up, I mean, it can be literally, she looked cute, or he looked, like he was funny and I wanted to talk to him, and he's handsome. And, that draws that first sort of connection, or at least draw to. And then from there, we start to build on that desire to connect with them further. Again, sort of to beat that Gottman metaphor apart, but then you start to build the walls of like trust and sharing, and those things. So that's essentially, and again, there's a lot that goes into that, but you're initially drawn to that person because there's some sort of attraction, usually a mix of, right, both the visual, physical, emotional. Humor is one that I usually always hear when we do that. What's the origin story? You get couples in, and that's usually where you begin, is tell us your origin story. And I don't know, I'm going to say 8 out of 10 times, probably, it's she or he made me laugh. They were funny. That's how we know. It's interesting. That's how we know in session too, when you're working with couples. Um, you start to hear too, that statement too is, oh, we don't laugh like we used to, or we don't, again. So, I mean, if you want to say what's the pop top can out of the pocket pair bond, which is a fun word, but I mean, you enjoy being with this person. They bring about sort of that added zest to life, right? You start out by sort of seeing stuff through their eyes, and it's funny and it's fun and it's great, and you want to be with them. And again, for first responders, it really is, in my opinion, and this is why this is a great topic and probably going to take too much time, and I'm probably going to ramble, but when I really talk resiliency anymore, I think the area that we're doing a disservice, especially in supporting our first responders, is in the relational aspect, right? I mean, it's a team sport,
Mm-hmm.
right? Taking 911 calls, anything generated to go in to help people who are threatened by death or serious injury, that's a team sport.
Mm-hmm.
If you try to do it by yourself, you can, but it can be a long road, right? So,
I
so
love
yeah.
that. I love the idea of team sport. Now, that's
Well,
not.
the problem is team sport, but I'm just going to say, as one that works in the field, and then one that was a supervisor in the field, and one that was a ground pounder in the field, and married multiple decades. A lot of guilt around that I still look and see that we don't do a lot in supporting the team. We do
Mhm.
great things in supporting the individual as they're out there taking the calls. I think I shouldn't say great things, better. That's why this LEMWA program that you guys have put together, where I mean, you can have these support things, and you're looking at supporting the spouses and significant others and even the families. That's phenomenal, because that's what we need to be doing, right?
Thanks. Yeah, I hope so. I
Yeah.
mean, we want to keep growing it. So as you mentioned, kind of like that drive to pair bond, does that grow and adapt as we seek more that long-term life partner status?
It does. And that's why communication, again, you start talking about themes that we hear and things we pay attention to. And it sounds so pedantic sometimes that it's hard to talk about it because, right, there's so many books out there. It's one of those things that's been, I wouldn't say co-opted. It needs to be talked about, but man, there's a lot of people smarter than me making a lot more money on this and should talk to them. But really, again, you look at little themes about what makes strong, healthy relationships, especially amongst first responders. And again, we'll just call it resilient, right? The first responder can be resilient. Agencies can be resilient. We need to talk about relationships that are resilient. And, there's people out there talking about like bulletproofing your marriage and those sorts of things too. But one of those things that we see that if you maintain consistently or actually work on it, and it's not like if it goes bad, you can't recover. And that's a beautiful thing about relationships. You'll hear these terms rupture and repair. And actually what we see is that's probably the biggest thing we want to have and we want to manage well, right? Each relationship, you will have a rupture, but how do you repair that? And a lot of times it comes down to communication. And so as you're building this relationship, and especially navigating the vagaries of working shift work, of seeing really horrible things, of hearing real horrible things, of hearing really amazing things, right? That communication is extremely important, and it's something we need to be intentional. My favorite word, right? We need to be intentional and we need to work on. It's not something you can just sort of say, oh, it'll happen or it won't, or I'm a good communicator. Well, are you really? I mean, so communication is probably what I say is that real foundational aspect, what you're starting to build on. That's communication is what causes your Gottman house, in my opinion, to be square, right? To start it off square and the corners are right. I mean, I'm a country boy, so I've lived in a lot of houses that were not square, especially as I've done additions. It's like, holy cow. And the neat thing is you can still tear it down and rebuild a lot of times, right? Go back to square one, and that's communication. Communication's your square, your level, right?
Yeah.
And building that relationship. Yeah.
And that makes sense. So knowing those things, what are some of the common challenges that are faced within couples where one or even both work in the field of law enforcement, whether they're in dispatch or on the road or parole and probation, corrections, whatever it might be?
Well, and this is why, and it's obviously right. I probably lean to one modality more than others, but I'm gonna go back to the Gottman research and what they've shown and why I think it's really applicable to first responders. And in fact, when I get first responders saying, hey, we're looking for a couples therapist, I do suggest that they find somebody that at least has some training in that. The emotional focus stuff is good too, but really, and for that, Gottman's point out to this idea of like bids for connection. And that is really like a bid for connection, just a quick definition, and man, I'm probably going to ham fist this, but is, it's whether it's a verbal or a nonverbal, but it's I would say a clear, but sometimes semi-clear is, again, somebody been married for a while, it can be an unclear action, but it's like, you're taking a walk with your spouse or significant other, and they say, oh, that's a nice deck on that house or something like that, right? It's a clear attempt to connect with you, even if it's just information sharing. And or it could be you're sitting on the couch and they reach out to touch your hand, or the physical bid for connection. It's just, again, connection can be real innocuous. And as first responders, and I'll just say this as the biggest sinner, boy, oh boy, a lot of times, like when I was carrying cases, when I was in that kind of job where I'm carrying cases, and we know that even though I'm sitting on the couch at home on my time off, my mind's still probably back on what I got to think about for court on Monday when I'm showing up. It's really easy to miss those bids of connection. And in fact, they break them. And again, boy, it's been a while since I've done my studies, but they break them down into your responses as like 3 responses. It's like you can turn towards, an example would be, hey, wow, that's a pretty, deck on that house. And I don't know why I'm bringing up deck, maybe because I'm doing some remodels or something currently, but it's like, it's a nice deck on that house. And, oh yeah, what is it about that you like, right? That's just engaged. That's turning towards, right? It's active listening. It's, and that's where you really start to put money in the bank. Then there's turning away, which is, I mean, again, that's me on the couch. My spouse reaches out to touch my hand or something, and or says something about the movie we're watching. And I'll be honest, I'm on my phone looking at the email from the DA, which happens a lot. that's kind of a turning away. I mean, you're not even responding, right? And that's what they see it as. Right. Then there's oh my gosh, turning against.
Mm.
Um, Turning against is interesting, and this is the one I see. I see a lot. Again, and I did it a lot. And again, depending on why, but and it's not the sole province of first responders, but I see it quite a bit. Turning against would be three things that I see. Maybe the first one is, we're in that space, we're coming home from work or something. We get in that space where our bucket's too full because of whatever's going on. And maybe, I'm on night shift, I'm tired. My lieutenant's been an ass. I've taken too many shitty calls or whatever. And it's like, hey, that's a pretty deck. And what I hear, we're walking, that's a really interesting deck design. What do you think about that? And I hear, right, because I'm already trending toward the negative, I hear criticism in that. And I hear, you know what, I'm sorry, we don't have enough money to have a deck like that. I wish, yep, I'll just work harder. We go to the negative. That's turning against, right? That's, uh, the second one would be, no, that's dumb. You hear that a lot. No, that's a dumb design. We could never do, right. We'll disregard pretty quick. The other turning against that, again, you see a lot with first responders is they'll go towards the fix it, right? And sometimes that's just that statement. It's definitely a bid for connection, but it's like, oh, the car's, doing this or something's happening here. And it's like, no, I'll fix this. Or even better, the one that was common in my relationship, my wife would say, oh, this is happening at work with so and so. And of course, by that time, I'm, bigwig Sheriff Chris Humphreys. And so I'm like, oh, well, let me give you a leadership point. This is what you should do.
Mhm.
That's not what she was wanting, obviously. She was wanting that, for me to listen, be actively listening, but I went right to fixing it for her. That
Mhm.
technically is kind of almost a turning against, because then of course, who knows what she's thinking, but it's definitely me sort of sounding like you're doing it wrong, do it this way, right?
Mhm.
Um, and that's how that can slowly degrade over time, right? Um, there. So again, that was real preachy, and I really ham-fisted that. I'm not great. I've had some of the trainings and the Gottman stuff. It's very applicable, but does that make sense at all?
Oh yeah, totally.
Okay.
And I,
So
I think, and tell me if I'm like wrong in how we applying this term here, but is it really like when they're sharing or that bid for affection, if it's more of that like communication piece, are we looking for attunement? Like, what are we looking for, right? Like, do we want someone to just match where we're at? I mean,
I don't know if we match. And I mean, some I would say might. That would be, and I don't know if I would necessarily go to that assumption, and we don't really work from that. But a lot of times, we'll say, well, and in fact, because you can have a disagreement. This isn't saying, and that's actually a good question, Claire, and as I'm sort of verbally processing it, this doesn't mean you have to find attunement and agreement,
okay.
right? And in fact, you can respond to a bid that even you're not in agreement with, right? Um, and many people do, and they do it really well. And that's, where we talk about making sure that you can have conflict, for example, but you need to validate that person's experience. And boy, I know people roll their eyes. That's real social worky, Chris. I get it. I'm a therapist now,
Yeah.
but it really is, right? I mean, this person you obviously have an emotional connection to. You obviously, again, going back to what you said, right? Why do people pair bond? You were drawn, you're building something together. And yet sometimes if again, I'm just so tired or I'm burned out or, or all the reasons that our bucket's a little too full, I
Mhm.
go to that thing where it's like, no, you're wrong, or I'm going to fix it, or I can't see your point of view, which is tragic in our personal relationships, right? Because that's why I'm with you. I want to experience life with you. So even though I don't see it that way, right? I validate that you are seeing it that way, right? And that's that word validation, which, there's a definite skill for that. But and I don't need to go into the phrases here, but learn to validate your partner. You don't have to necessarily agree and you don't have to fix it. That's why I say, we're pretty good at validating, but then we shove in I can see how you see it that way, but why don't you do this? Don't do that. Just let the dot kind of land. Claire, I can see how you think that's a great deck. It is pretty. They put a lot of nice paint on it, right?
Yeah.
Even though I'm looking at it structurally and going, holy crap, my hot tub would never fit. Not that, that I would ever think that, but you see there, right? I mean, and that's so again, because when you start to lose focus on being able to see from their perspective, or even just allow their reality to exist, again, you may not even need to see it from their perspective. That's and we see that on the street, right? When you're really tired, you stop to see sort of, I know that was me, right? I couldn't see how this person would make this decision on a call and walk away going, man, you're a dumbass, right? We sometimes take that home too. Then now you get into scorekeeping.
Oh.
And scorekeeping is a dangerous spot to be in. And I have had more than one client sit in my office, and I would ask this question when they're talking about a conflict with their spouse, and essentially say, what caused you to really feel that you needed to, say this back? And it's like, well, and I'm going to make it from the male point of view because that's usually what I hear, but I hear it from the females too. Well, I couldn't let him win this one, or I can't let him, have this one. And it's like, wow, now, there's a chalkboard in their head and they're going, Chris won, Claire won, check, check, check. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Right. And that's when you stop being able to sort of realize they're seeing it from their reality, their experience, their thing. Yeah. Yeah. Ooh, that's deep.
I know, right? I love it though. So, and I think, you're going to be able to say this better than I am, but all relationships are going to take work, right? Even for the most ideal of partners, they're all going to take work. And then that changes throughout the relationship, right? Especially just based on, what's being released in the brain or in the early stages of love and, infatuation. And then as the relationship develops, still yummy stuff getting released in the brain, just different, and different levels of work, right?
Yeah, that's that ability to repair. I mean, when we really start to work, those couples that are really like, how do we, again, to use that, how do we maybe take our house and true it back up? We're here together, whether it's a job, whether it's and I'm not laying all this on the feet of first round. Everybody has relational issues. I don't care if you work in a bank or you're, on a SWAT team. I mean, they have it. And they're going to rupture. You're going to have conflict, but it's how you manage that, meaning the repair portion. And again, much like we talk about resiliency in relation to trauma, right? There's the preparation for, there's the idea we know it's going to happen. So how do you recover from those two stages? It's the same, preparing for the ruptures because you're going to have them. That's that, again, idea of putting just psychological cash in the bank with your partner, doing those things that builds up. So when you do rupture, when Chris is a dumbass, it makes it easier for us to come back and do the repair. And the repair, there's elements of repairing, and there's loads of books and amazing. I mean, do the YouTubes. I'm sure there's all kinds of cool animated stuff about repair, but I really, for our first responders, man, it's really you need to have this in your back pocket. You need to be able to apologize.
Yeah.
Right. And not that, yeah, you're right, I'm sorry. Tone, remember, right? In repair, I tell people a lot of times, of course, it's important what you say, but really it's also important how you say it, right? Pay attention to that tone, right? You need to be able to view switch. You need to, which essentially means you'll say, right, you need to be able to understand their point of view. You may not be able to understand it, but you need to be able to view switch enough that you can say, okay, I know Claire. I know her really well. I could see why she's saying it this way, why she said it this way, right? And then just ability to forgive. And again, that's that scorekeeping portion, right? There should not be a running tally in here. It's not allowing yourself to be a victim, and it's not enabling, right? There's definitely behaviors that we have to hold our partners accountable for. But it comes down to sometimes that interesting two-sided question of why why is this person saying this to me in this way, or why could they do this to me? I mean, and sometimes that examination of it, and then followed by the question, why is it bothering me so much? And this is the interesting one you'll get. I'll get them on my couch and I'll know this is when the person is usually the first responder is probably has a lot of stuff going on. We can talk about the different spectrums of their work and their life. And then they'll sit there and they're like, I don't know why what she said or what he said hits so hard. And
Mhm.
it'll be an innocuous statement or something, and that's again when we start to look at, okay, um, you know, maybe some trauma work, communication, breaking it down and starting to square that house back up a little bit, right? Um, yeah.
And just being aware, I think, of how our early life experiences, right? How we attach in childhood. We all kind of bring those attachment wounds, whatever they might be. We all carry something, in all likelihood. And our relationships are gonna poke those attachment wounds sometimes.
Mhm.
Right. And so that repair.
Well, I'll tell you, if you really want to know basic, and it's so interesting to me because we're taught at day one in the academy, again, to make it sort of first responder specific. We're taught at day one in the academy and hammered it over and over again. And then if you move around in different areas, you get it trained in one way or the other. But also the just during a repair, ask open-ended questions. And it's so funny because again, out on the street or in an interview room or as leadership, that's how they function. And then go home to our house and have a rupture, and it's tell me why this specifically, and we get real tapped into, and it's like, if you really want to help repair, go back to what you're trained to do. Ask an open-ended question and let them sort of begin to process, and you'll make that connection. So
Yeah.
yeah. And then you're going to factor in other things too that impede, and they're just logistical, as like your schedules, your lack of quality time, and how to build into those.
Mhm.
Um, right. So
So, yeah, so let's talk like lack of quality time due to schedules, demands, the need for a connection, how to balance all that. So, just when I think about those things, uh, have you watched The Big Bang Theory ever?
a couple episodes. That was
Watched
yeah.
it? Okay. So this might
Yeah.
not be as familiar with you to you though, but there's one of the lead characters is a man who has autism, I believe, super high functioning. They're all brilliant in the show and the
Mhm.
characters are. Um, but he writes up relationship agreements for all of his friends, because he needs the map of like what are the boundaries and what's acceptable and not acceptable, and like he doesn't understand what sarcasm is. Like he faces all these barriers of just like what folks not on the spectrum or that are neurodivergent don't necessarily face as
Right.
much. So he has like these relationship agreements, and his friends, have these issues sometimes in their own personal relationships, their romantic relationships, and so they'll go to him and say like, "Oh, we need you to write up a relationship agreement for us." And that's extreme, right? But I just love that actually lays out for them, right? Like, what are our expectations? And like, if we do have a rupture, how long until do we have before we go back to seek repair and we set that deadline? And what does quality time look like? And every Tuesday when I'm on this schedule, swings for the next 3 months, every Tuesday, I'm off. We're gonna have a 2 hour date night together or something, right? Like, I mean, those things kind of seem like they would be really helpful if you can schedule them out. And I know that sometimes, you get called in, call outs and those sorts of things. But so what are some tools, and is a relationship agreement too extreme, or is it helpful to actually sit down and write those things out?
Yeah, we'll use those a lot. Again, it goes back to making your relationship resilient, right? Preparation for, right?
Mm.
There's these things going to happen. So putting that money in the bank, and again, we'll go back to that. It's being intentional. I have worked with many couples that we do and I wouldn't say we don't call it a relationship agreement, but we negotiate needs,
Mhm.
right, prior to, and especially in relation to the job. And sometimes people kind of go negotiation and makes it, but once you sort of engage in that, I think they realize, or at least so far, they realize the benefit to that. It's not a cold term. It's really, and it is that, okay, so, well, like what you talked about, we see a lot in couples. There's the pursuer and the withdrawer, right? During conflict, there's a person that, and I'll just use mine for example. I'm definitely a pursuer, right? I'm again night shift cop, right? I want this done in 30 minutes, gone to the next call. Sometimes I fall into that in my relationship, even after 3 decades, right? My wife is more the processor, right? She's the smarter one of us, I'll tell you, and she needs sometimes to pull back and really know where she's at before she speaks, which probably would do me some good. And I'm going to tell you, it's clearly we have negotiated this over the years, sat down and negotiated it. It took some getting bonked on the head, where when we have obviously an issue, a rupture, let's call it, conflict, we both agree. I mean, I give her that space, right? That means Chris has got to be patient, which for Chris Humphreys sometimes really sucks. Chris has got to be patient, but she also knows she's on the clock, right? And we know, and I mean, down to the wire where depending on kind of when it happens on the clock in the day, there's that fun statement of don't go to bed angry, but we like to have the idea of don't go to bed without at least, right, that reconnection over. We may not resolve it, right? But and that's clearly a negotiation. It helps too if you've leaned in and done some work ahead of time, again, by knowing and I mean the term, and it's just an easy one to reference because it's so popular, and there's some pretty helpful stuff around that. But how do you hear connection or love, and how do you express it? And those, sometimes you hear people reference their love languages and stuff, and that's a cool framework. I think it's a little more nuanced when you really get deep into it, but it's a cool framework to know. And so to know that, physical touch is something I need, right? It does help me feel that connection, and that connection helps to fill, my psychological sort of bank with you. Then we need to be intentional, because I know I'm working nights, you're working days. Our bed is, you're jumping out, I'm jumping in, and now it's just got one big crease in the middle. So can we grab our phones, look at time, and say, okay, at this time, whether or not it's intimacy or not, but I mean, some sort of situation where we are going out to dinner and you're holding my hand, or, I mean, something that way. Again, in my situation, my wife knows that when I come home, I mean, and I walk in, just that hug and a kiss. It's really important. Nothing about what is said or how, just again, it really sort of grounds me. But I worked in some of those units where I didn't know when I was coming home, and my head was spinning still when I'm walking in the door. And she could say all kinds of words to me, and I could literally say them back to her. But to be honest, I have no idea what I was saying, and I have no idea what she was saying. But in a strange situation, again, because I sort of navigate towards touch, especially hers, right? I'm not a big hugger, but something about hers that would pull me back into the moment, right? And again, that was clearly negotiated. I mean, she's the one that sat down and said, okay, so I'm seeing this, and this is causing some problems. We're just not. And I just had to tell her, I think if you just grab me and kind of almost like a little child, and that's kind of what I am, grab my face and just kind of bring it towards you, that would sort of dial me in. Again, not a perfect fit, but these are things that we negotiate beforehand, and a lot of times because you've had the experience, you've been able to do. And that's why I always say with the repair, if you can, after you repair from the conflict, if you can both kind of say, this is something I've noticed, and I think I either need, or I think I need to do for you. And again, it's that idea of using it as a lesson to build on. Don't waste these. It's beautiful when couples can go through it, survive it. Why would you waste it? Right? If you can pull something out of it, and that's, so, and again, I'm not putting our experience up as anything perfect, because trust me, it's somewhere my wife's head is shooting up and going, what? But it's just easier to do that as self-disclosure, I guess. So.
Yeah, and it's really a growth-based mindset. I feel like using that rupture as a learning opportunity, because rupture is going to happen. And then the repair, just focusing.
Well, because we'll let it sit. First responders, we'll let that sit and fester.
Yeah.
I mean, we will. A lot of times you hear, I'm just so tired, I don't want to deal with it. Or, we're already into scorekeeping, or this one. I have told them this is what we should be doing. They don't want to listen. So then fuck it. Sorry to curse. Can I curse? Sorry. But you'll hear that then, and we get real binary. And again, understanding, right? That is not how we work in life, in the world, on the job, right? It's 1,001 ways to get there. There's very few options on either side where it's a total no-go, but there's all kinds of options in between. But why are we going so binary? Right. And that's again where we lose the ability to see from different angles. We lose the ability to apologize. Right. I remember being told when I was an early rookie cop, being told, oh, don't on a call, don't ever say you're sorry because that leaves it open to risk management and getting sued, right? And all that, like a car accident, right? It'll say on the back of your car, never apologize on the car accident. Man, do not run your relationships like that. You do something stupid, you say something in a bad tone, and you did, I mean, this is a person that is there in your corner. It's a team sport. Why do you have ego about it? Yeah, that was dumb. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just chatted with someone before in another meeting, and he used the term extreme accountability. I haven't had a chance to sit with that very long, but I absolutely love that concept.
Jocko Willink is kind of the big one out front on that. I don't know if Navy said that, but yeah, it's phenomenal. And I've thought about that and there's some discussion about that with relational things. Extreme accountability is, and applying it to that is pretty phenomenal. It can be hard though, because again, it's relational stuff is so tied in with everything who we are. And you mentioned, Claire, I mean, developmental things, right? I mean, you want to, and trauma informed is scientifically backed, and we know, and I hate to go that way because a lot of people hear it as victim mentality. It's not, but man, you want something to hit that switch that is buried deep, but came about because of something, attachment developed, mom or dad did this or this. You want something that has a clear access. It's your personal relationships, right? I mean, everybody's focused on the job, and that, no, man, yeah, the person you love, and that's what you want. You want them to have access to you and your history, but you start to get that a little stressed out, and it can become reactive, and that can be a deal. So yeah, so extreme ownership is a great discussion to have, but again, sometimes a little nuanced insofar as some people may not actually have the ability to own those behaviors because it does go back to something real young, and they can become extremely reactive. And that's a negotiated point sometimes, talking about preparing for. I've worked with couples that have done these amazing jobs, and one will have to sit down and say, and it's vulnerable, and it's usually the guy, to be honest, that finally says, do you want to know why I speak like this when we talk about this? And then it comes out because, my parents went bankrupt when I was 11, and I remember this. And now every time you talk to me about money, I break out in sweats and I can't talk about it. And they usually are standing up and going, so now, and I mean, it's like, and their partner's like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And again, it's not victim mentality. It's not, but it's truly this person that's like, I can't talk about money because it causes me to, or when I do talk about money, I get really angry sounding. It's because I think every minute I'm going to go bankrupt, those sorts of things. So, yeah.
But then that the partner feeling gratitude because they want to experience life with them, and now they have that opening to it, right? It's like what you said earlier.
Well, because it leads to this amazing question, then how do we talk about money in a way that doesn't make that 11-year-old, and again, I know this gets a little therapist-y woohoo, but really it doesn't make that 11-year-old jump up and grab you by the throat because you're going bankrupt and you're not going to have shoes on your feet, right? Kind of thing. Yeah. And some of that then is individual. Some of that doesn't need a therapist. Some of that is just, well, okay, when you talk to me in that tone, I hear my parents arguing about it in the kitchen, thinking they're keeping it away from me. And yet I'm, the next room down, hearing my dad cry, that sort of thing. It can get really deep, but boy, yeah, you talk about connection, and then it does go into, so let's negotiate this. How, because we need to talk about money. How can I talk to you about it and make you feel safe? Yeah.
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 I love it. So one more negotiation tool before we wrap up that I've heard out there and would love your kind of opinion on, from the queen, as you called her before, Brene Brown. So there's this clip going around from a podcast that she was on, and she talks about how like relationships are not 50-50, that's just like bullshit. She's like, relationships are sometimes 80-20. And so she says that her and her husband, one of the things they've negotiated is like they get home and they say where they're at, and maybe they're not at 100%. And so they understand that where the other person is and what they can give in those moments. And so I love that as a tool, just like, negotiate when we get home. I'm going to tell you like, oh my gosh, I'm at a 30%. It's been a day, and your partner's at 50. What do you think about that as like a negotiation for folks?
I, I think that's phenomenal. And in fact, I don't know who took it from who. There's so much amazing stuff going out there, and I don't think we need to fight in that. But like, I also apply that to that work-life balance thing that everybody, and they think about, they apply it to our relationships. It should be this equal. That's bullshit, right? You don't live that way. And negotiating that early and learning how to communicate that to your partner, because we technically do anyways, right? We'll walk in after a day and everything about me is communicating something's wrong, right? It's communicating something's wrong, but then we'll do this dumb thing because we feel like, well, if I say that I'm really not, if I'm at 30% today, that makes me a failure. That'll bring up conflict, right? And so, but we're still storming around the house, definitely in a place. And now our partner is sitting there thinking, what's going on? And of course, what we'll find out, they'll tend to internalize it. Then when it's about me, why can't I make her or him feel better? Or is it something I did, right? There's all this questioning. So that's that communication portion, being very open. And it may not be, I'm not good at math, so I may not be able to say, yeah, I'm at 37.3% today, but definitely saying I'm at this. And I've had a lot of situations where one partner will communicate, hey, I need the first 30 minutes at home just to power down. And I see that a lot in smaller agency, let's say the law enforcement side, where, it's the take home car, it's they're taking calls or on the radio, right, until they get up to the house and put it in park, and the car's, very clearly out there for everybody to see the home, and that sometimes can be a tough one to negotiate, because like, if it's the husband, a lot of times I come home and I'll hear the wife say, but I've been home with the kids and I really need now. And negotiating, okay, maybe you don't get 30, but it's 15, right? Is 15 enough, or those sorts of things. But where am I at? Yeah, there was another thought I had regarding that, but I think it just left me. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
No, I think that that's really important, knowing where people are at in relation to. Oh, well, the other portion I would kind of shoehorn into that is this saying too, where, and I get real blunt on this one, is with the first responders. And I know, because I came from this generation where we were specifically told by leadership, by senior cops, well, don't go home and don't share what you do at work with your spouses, right? You don't want to traumatize them. And of course, now I recognize that senior person or that supervisor was also on their third divorce, in the mid 90s. Nothing against them, but I mean, I know now that's toxic. Do not do that. Sure. If you're at a cocktail party with a bunch of strangers and you start telling nasty war stories, as we'll do, just to kind of mess with, yeah, you might traumatize those people. They have no emotional connection with you, and their mind is running through putting themselves in this visual and all these weird things. Sure. Okay. But if it's somebody that cares for you, right, has that connection, and you come home and they look at you, and again, you may not be able to say, hey, I'm only at 30%, but they can tell something's wrong. I'll use the example because this is, you're coming from that call where you had to do CPR on that kid, or the horrible this or the horrible that. And you walk back through your door and you've been told, don't tell your spouse, don't tell your significant other, don't share them details because you traumatize them. And they say, how are you today? How was it today? And of course, we'll go fine. But everything about you says what?
Not fine.
No, I just did CPR on a child. Right? And so immediately, what are they going to detect? Well, first, they're going to detect secret keeping. Again, whether they know it or not, right? It's withholding, and that already, right, becomes something, right? Because they'll start to notice it and then they will start to internalize. Why
Mhm.
won't she or he share with me? Why, what is going on? What is it about me? What is these things that become toxic? And then all of a sudden, again, now you're at 30% because you're just coming home from doing CPR on a child,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And yet you're not communicating that. Don't fall into that trap. I would love to get every new first responder that's entering into a relationship and say, you don't have to come and cry and tell them how horrible it is,
Mhm.
but you're not going to freak them out if they say, what happened today? Yeah, it was a pretty shitty day. I just breathed life into, or tried to breathe life into a toddler, and that really sucks. Wow. And now again, you see that communication, there's connection
Mhm.
because they also know they can't fix that, but
Mhm.
they hopefully are going to say, what do you need?
Yeah.
I mean, again, and it starts to build into that, but don't fall prey to that thing that we run into, or at least I was told, and I know a whole generation with me was told, oh, don't bring this stuff home. Uh, no, that's where it should go. It's a team sport. Now, as agencies, we should do a better job. And that's why I love your program, is we should do a better job in supporting those teammates,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
But yeah, boy, I got on my high horse there, but yeah,
I love
yeah.
it. No, your high horse is great. I feel like it's such wisdom, knowledge,
Don't,
expertise that we can all benefit from. So,
don't
um,
enable me, Claire.
ah,
So,
thank you so much for your time today.
yeah,
And I'm excited to get this out to folks, and then we'll see you again soon for our next Rebooting the Blue. Thanks,
yeah,
everybody.
take care.